present to you Scott McLeod. Yikes. Hey, I got to plug in my laptop, so while I'm doing that, you're going to need a discussion buddy. So if you're sitting by yourself, get connected with at least one other person in the auditorium, okay? Go.
I'll be your buddy. Logan. High school. Math. Calculus. Geometry. And whatever else. Okay.
All right, are we ready to rock and roll? Some of you still don't have a discussion buddy. I see you, you're by yourself. I wasn't kidding. Let's see if I can grab that. Cool. Yes. Awesome. Okay, cool. All right, I'm going to dive right in. I'm going to give you this web address at the end. This is where you can access all my slides that I showed today, as well as a bunch of other resources, including everything from all my other sessions that I do throughout the day. So don't worry about jotting that down right now. You'll get it again later. Let's talk about most schools everywhere. In most schools everywhere, we have the teacher at the front of the room, classic call and response. Students sit passively, they take notes, they work in isolation at their desks, they read, and they do lots of review questions from the textbook. Questions like, Billy worked at a toy store, he put 1,573 new toys on the shelf. At the end of the day, customers bought 862 of those toys. How many new toys does Billy have left? It's a very popular toy store, apparently. Or a person pulls a toboggan for a distance of 35 meters along the snow with a rope directed 25 degrees above the snow. The tension in the rope is 94, what's that, newtons? How much work is done with the toboggan by the tension force? How much work is done if the same tension is directly parallel to the snow? Who cares? Worksheets, and more worksheets, and more worksheets. We love our worksheets. Maybe because student enthusiasm for them is so high. Sometimes we spice things up with a so-called project. For example, here's a 4th grade state float full of low-level facts about the state of Pennsylvania. Does anybody know the state fish? We like to do coat hanger mobiles, cereal box book reports. And then my most recent favorite, my daughter's Chinese Dynasty Fact Pagoda. The task was to learn about the Chinese dynasties. And the teacher said that they had to present their information in some creative way. He showed them like a ladder and some lanterns and whatever. So she and her friend decided they were going to make a pagoda. So the next thing you know, we're at the grocery store. We're trying to figure out boxes of different sizes. We're going to the hardware store to buy spray paint, right? We're buying gold-colored poster board and whatever so we can make this dome pagoda. 2 years later, my son, of course, pagoda, so he had to take soda cans and wrap them in facts about the Chinese dynasties. So he made a Chinese dynasty fact dragon. And we call these projects, but really, if you think about the notion that we learn what we do, right? My daughter and my son spent 90% of their time making a pagoda and 10% of the time looking up facts on Wikipedia about Chinese dynasties and slapping them on a pagoda with a dragon. And if you ask my daughter 2 weeks later what she knows about the Chinese dynasties, essentially zip. And she got an A+ because the pagoda looked good. And this is what we call projects in our schools today. So what I've described so far is pretty indicative across the country. We see classrooms all around, elementary, middle school, high school. The research is pretty clear that about 80 to 85% of what kids do is low-level knowledge work. They are bored out of their minds. Recent Gallup poll, some students said that we're lucky if we hold on to them In elementary school, we get about 3/4 of them say they're engaged in school. By the time they're leaving us in high school, we're lucky if they're at 40%. They might be physically there, but they're mentally checked out. And of course, many of them have also dropped out, etc. Even more challenging is the fact that this routine work that we do in schools, this dark blue or purple line on the graph, is increasingly devalued in our economy. In other words, over the last 4 or 5 decades, the percentage of jobs that involve routine cognitive work have declined quite steadily. In fact, the only segment of the American economy where jobs are growing are jobs that involve non-routine mental work, the stuff at the upper end of Bloom's taxonomy, or around the wheel and Webb's depth of knowledge, that critical thinking, collaboration, creativity, problem-solving stuff that we say we want to get in our classes, and yet 80 to 85% of what we do in schools every day with kids is that dark purple line. It's routine cognitive work. We have a few schools that are attacking this head on. They're taking to heart what Chris Lehman talks about in his TEDx Philly talk.
What we need to do is honor the lives kids lead. What if we said high school is not preparation for real life? What if we stopped saying you'll need this someday? What if we said to kids, the lives they lead matter now? What you do matters now. What could they build? What could they create? What could they do?
So schools around the country, they're trying to figure out, how do we make it better? We can make it better. We must make it better. Now, let's hold in your head right now. First one is an issue of time. We have no time to do this. And the challenge for us in our school systems is that we are so busy implementing the 20th century schooling model, we don't have time to initiate the 21st century learning model. We're too busy doing old stuff. Somehow we have to figure out how to let stuff go. The other challenge, of course, is that we feel very constrained. We feel constrained by accountability mandates, by leadership, by perceived expectations of our community, our parents, and so on. We feel like we're hemmed in this very small lot with a big fence around it, when in actuality, the schools that I'm about to show you have discovered that there are still fences. We still have things we need kids to know. We still have mandates we need to comply with. But there's an incredible amount of room to run and explore in multiple new directions. And so my time with you this morning is really going to be spent showing you a variety of different schooling models where we're trying to break away from that routine cognitive work. We're trying to break away from that mind-numbing, stultifying, boring stuff that we ask our kids to do on a day-to-day basis. Figure out how do we engage them in different ways, in more cognitively complex ways, in ways that give them agency and ownership over their own learning, and generate quite a great deal of energy and enthusiasm as we go. In other words, there are places that are doing things differently. Let's talk about what those places look like. In some schools across the country, we have our first glimmers of moving away from the lecture, call and response, work in isolation at your desk, textbook-heavy, routine cognitive work model. For example, maybe a school might implement an exploratory model where it throws in a period a day or every third day or whatever, where teachers say, hey, I have an interest in guitar or quilting or photography or whatever, and let's create like an elective period where kids can come, learn how to do those things, right? And we have schools that are doing that. Some schools have taken that a little further. They've actually carved out time in the school day or the school week. We call it like 20% time or genius hour. It's modeled on this idea from 3M or Google, where maybe 1 day out of 5 you work on something that you're interested in at your company, with the intended benefit that hopefully down the road it'll lead to something that pays off for the company. So the legend of 3M, of course, is that some guy working during 20% time discovered a glue that wasn't very sticky. And 3M was like, what's the good of that? And then they figured out, oh, Post-it notes. Ooh, a whole new market, right? And off we go. And so in these 20% times or genius hours, we give kids an opportunity to identify what they care about and what they're interested in, and then they work on passion projects. So a kid might explore, I don't know, dinosaurs, or knitting, or goth music, or hydraulics, so he can pimp his car, or somebody wants to teach themselves the piano. Right? Here's a school in Colorado where a kid's passion project was around designing a new mountain bike trail in the area. So you see, he did a lot of research, he did mapping, took photography, went out and took photographs, worked with the appropriate government agencies to try and figure out what would that look like. Here's another one. This is a middle school student studying the effect of magnesium chloride on radish seeds and mealworm behavior. It's a pretty impressive passion project. This is a small house completely designed and built from scratch by a high school girl. She was a sophomore. And then this is her passion project. So it could be something relatively small, it could be something relatively big. You know, the point here is that when we give kids time to explore their own interests and their own passions, they come up with some pretty interesting stuff, and they learn all kinds of cool things as they go about that. Spirit Lake High in Spirit Lake, Iowa has taken that notion a bit further. So they do what's called a J term, which is the 2 weeks right after January, where they basically suspend school as they know it. And for 2 weeks, kids work on projects that are created by the teachers for about 50 hours. So about 5 hours a day for about 10 days. And then that experience culminates with a community exhibition where they then show their community what they learned. Teachers advertise their projects all around the school. They're basically recruiting, and then students sign up for the projects in which they want to participate. Kind of like the exploratory idea, but a little bigger scale. Right? So for example, recent projects included a theatrical production in Spanish. They put on Alice in Wonderland. Another project is where they did lean engineering at the local Polaris plant, calculating cycle times using Yamazumi charts, learning about elemental spaghetti diagrams, and so on at the local snowmobile manufacturer. Using language arts and graphic design skills to create a website and map of the haunted history of Iowa, so using those historical research skills in a new way. Creating an online course with the Humane Society about animal cruelty, doing a public awareness campaign of winter recreation activities in their county, because everybody says when it's freezing cold in Iowa, there's nothing to do, so they wanted to dispute that. Here's the sculpture that a group of kids made in 2 weeks to go outside the Performing Arts Center. And so this J term, some schools do these in May terms, right? It's this idea that we can carve out a block of time where kids can really go deep in an extended way. And then Spirit Lake has liked the learning so much that's happening during their J term that they actually have now expanded it so the entire 9th grade is now a project-based learning experience where they can do humanities projects like this throughout the school year and address both their English language arts and their turn to your neighbor and talk for just a minute about when you think about exploratories and 20% time and Genius Hour and Passion Project and J terms. Is that something you could do? Is that doable? Or is that scary? Talk to your neighbor. Go.
Our last year. You can actually ask them. Look around the filter. They'll tell you. And then people say, try to show this video. It won't show. Kids, how do I get around it? They go to this website, this website, this. Now you can go to the website. All right, thanks.
All right, let's come on back. Let's look at a few more schools. Now we're going to shift from small blocks of time, or covering a little bit of it, and now we're going to look at some schools that have actually shifted into incorporating this into an everyday occurrence during the school day. They're creating classes and credits that focus on this kind of work. I'm going to start with Poudre High, Preston Middle School in Fort Collins, Colorado. So, for example, here's an agricultural education class at the high school. They build action projects right into the curriculum. So this is the student's investigation into rabbit hair genetics. As you can see, when I was there visiting, they had students working in small groups, and the idea was to try and get into the heads of cows at the slaughtering facility. Because apparently when cows are stressed as they go to slaughter, they release chemicals and hormones that make their meat taste bad. And so we want cows to go peacefully to slaughter so that our meat tastes better. And they were building all these like scale mock-up diagrams. They had little plastic cows, and they were making cardboard mock-ups, and we were trying to figure out what the perspective of the cow was and how to keep it blocked off from other cows, and also the mooing of distress and all that stuff. They were working on sight lines and sound lines and whatever, and they're talking about strapping GoPro cameras to the cows and whatever. I don't know. Anyway, it was some pretty interesting stuff, right? So that was a cool ag ed class. That's way better than just reading a dumb textbook, right? This is the culinary arts class. They basically do all the catering for the district as well as for major events throughout the community. They had just kicked off a campaign, an online fundraising campaign to try and raise money to create Fort Collins' 4th food truck. And then they're going to work with the business and marketing students at this school to market it, to do market segmentation and figure out how to advertise to different groups and figure out how to, launch the potential customers for the food truck. This is a pretty cool thing. This is their geometry and construction project. Apparently geometry and construction is a national program, which I didn't know about. And so basically what happens is that the kids, there's a house behind the high school. There's construction trailers back there, and the house is going to go to Habitat for Humanity. But the students who work on this house first spend time in the construction trailer learning geometry. So as my 11th grade tour guide explained to me, I asked him, I said, so how is your learning of math different this year? And he said, he's apparently very comfortable with it, because he said, well, for 3 years I sat on my ass in algebra and I didn't learn anything. And I kept flunking it, but I finally got through. He said, and then finally, I'm in this class, and what we learned here, and he points to the trailer, we then immediately apply here, and he points to the house. And he said, and I'm acing geometry. Thought that was pretty cool. Down at the middle school, they're doing things like philanthropic engineering projects. The idea is that they're using a 3D printer to create solar-powered light spaces, and then the idea is that we could send these to Uganda or the Dominican Republic or something like that, and then they would charge during the day, and then they would glow slightly at night and give them a few more hours of light than what they have now. So a philanthropic engineering project at the middle school, and this is all sort of some course credit stuff. At Ames High, where I live, I live in Ames, Iowa, which is where Iowa State University is. At Ames High, we have this wonderful, environmental science teacher. And he always gets kids out doing hands-on projects in the community and around the school, and they're always up to something. And Ames had this brilliant idea this spring to create a new integrated seminar in the fall that will be a 3-credit block of time. 2nd period, 3rd period, and 4th period. 1 period will be that year-long hands-on environmental science class that's always gone so well. But now what they're going to do is they're going to combine it with half a year of government and half a year of sociology. So they're not only doing the science in the field, but they're also studying the policy implications and impacts of the science. And through the Soc course, they're learning the human impacts of the science. And then they're adding to that an English language arts credit, so they can write about it, reflect about it, share it, and so on. And again, the cool thing about this is that they didn't have to create any new courses, they just had to tie them together in a way that made sense. And so there isn't a school in America that couldn't do this, right? That couldn't take a couple courses and combine and innovate it into disciplinary ways to create something really awesome for kids. And the great part about this is that not only does it have the hands-on science component, where they can be very active, but they're also folding in those questions around people and around policy that help resolve those questions for kids about why should I care about this? Why should I need to know about this? How is this relevant? Because they'll be living that relevancy every single day. And that's kind of cool. All right, one last example here from Iowa. This is Iowa Big. Iowa Big is a brand new school started up by the Cedar Rapids School District. They do all kinds of cool things. So, for example, students in Iowa Big are working on transforming the local zoo into an interactive and educational urban farm. They're co-researching the evolution of grapes with the University of Northern Iowa. They're creating one-handed keyboards for amputees. They're redesigning Johnson Elementary Magnet School. Other examples of the work include development of a waterborne drone that measures plastic waste in the oceans. They're designing arthritis-friendly utensils, creating a documentary of Lynn County's first medical examiner, designing and testing an aquaponics system in North Africa, and initiating a young women's entrepreneurship community and conference. There's a few other pictures from Iowa Big. There's one from their hackathon. Here's who knows what they're doing there. Learning about planes in space, using Connect, harder work building something. Here's a student who's working on his Wi-Fi recycling bin. And I love this tweet from Iowa Big. Basically what Iowa Big does is they say, we're going to carve a couple elective credits out of their school day so kids can, if they got a couple credits to play with, they can come participate in the Iowa Big experience. The rest of the courses are more typical at their local high school. And then what they've done is they've partnered with local community organizations. So they've gone to businesses, government agencies, nonprofits, and they've said, what's that next tier of stuff that you'd like to work on, but you don't have the resources for? Because we're going to throw some innovative high school kids at it. And so the beauty of the Iowa Big model is that it's every project the kids work on is created in tandem with community. Where the company has said, for example, we really want to spend some time or energy on this, but we don't have the personnel. Why don't you guys hack at it for us? Or we'll work with you to make that happen. And so the mentoring that's happening, and the community embeddedness that is happening, and the relevance that's happening is incredible. And the diversity of projects at Iowa Big is quite cool. And all they did was they carved out a couple elective projects, threw a couple enterprising teachers at it, started creating connections in the community, and off they went. It's an awesome place. So, those are some models of how do we create credit time or course space within existing systems to make that happen, right? Something more significant than just a 20% time or a genius hour kind of model or a J-tier model. Something where kids are actually getting credit, they're taking classes, right? And we saw Career High, we saw Preston Middle School, we saw Ames High, we saw Iowa Big. Those are some examples of that. Again, turn to your neighbor. We've now ratcheted it up a couple of notches. This is a little more complex. It's a little more moving over on the continuum here towards heavier, deeper stuff. Turn to your neighbor and talk again about, could you do this? Is this something that's doable? Or is this scary and impossible? Go.
If administration stops looking at administration is going to stop judges by test scores and PCA results. If they're going to do that, yes, this is completely possible. But if we have to, if they want
right, let's look at our next set of schools. Now we talked about carving out small amounts of time, then we talked about working into the school day on a regular basis where it's a course credit or several classes, perhaps in an interdisciplinary way. Now we have other places that are actually creating whole school models where they're focusing on student agency and deeper thinking work and pulling the tech in to make that happen, right? So the New Tech Network is a chain of almost 100 schools around the country now. I know there's a bunch of New Tech schools in Indiana. How many of you have ever been to a New Tech school? A few of you? Okay, if you've never been, you should get yourselves to one. They're pretty interesting. The one in Sioux Falls is the closest one to Iowa. It's actually right next door to the local technical college, which means that kids in their junior and senior year can just basically cross the street and take classes there as part of the high school program, which is a nice benefit. The way the New Tech Network is set up is that every single class is co-taught by 2 teachers, so they basically knock a wall out and they'll have 50, 60 kids in a classroom with 2 teachers. So it might be a class of humanities pairing, such as English and social studies, or maybe a class of math science pairing, or they get creative. Maybe you'll see a math teacher working with a graphic design instructor, for example. And then what they do is that teachers take their standards for their courses, and they literally cut them into little strips of paper, and they spread them all out on the table. And so the math and science teachers might get together and say, all right, so it looks like these 2 standards I have here might go well with those 3 standards of yours there. Let's pull those into a little clump. And then maybe you got 4 there, and I've got 3 here. We'll slide those into a little clump. They get all their clumps laid out, and they figure out what would a cool project look like that addressed those standards. So the intentionality of the New Tech model, where they're basically saying we have stuff to cover, we have stuff that we need to do, but we can still do it in a project-based way, and we know that by the end of the year we'll hit everything because all the projects hit all the different clumps that we laid out. And that's a pretty cool model. So here's, for example, one of the projects. This looks like a humanities one here. Oof, I can't read that from there. So Shakespeare's The Tragedy of Macbeth is a classic, but with backstabbing, intrigue, and prophecy, blah, blah, blah. At the end, we're left to assume certain things. Your job as a group is to write, produce, and perform the 6th act of Macbeth. Now, think about that for a minute. If you're going to write the 6th act of Macbeth, staying true to Shakespeare's intent and wording, you've got to know a lot about the first 5 acts of Macbeth, right? You can't just, guess on a few multiple choice quizzes or kind of slough it off in class. You really got to know your stuff. And that's pretty characteristic of New Tech projects, is you have to go pretty deep to show your understanding. Here's another one. Dear New Tech students, the South Dakota Game Fish Parks Regional Habitat Manager would like you to help create a public advocacy campaign that helps people in our community understand the benefits of planting native grasses and plants as opposed to ones imported from out of state. And again, speaking of listening skills, writing skills, the science skills, understanding why certain plants work well in this climate and other ones don't, lots of skills folded in over this multi-week project, working together to make that happen. The other cool thing about New Tech is they have school-wide learning outcomes, which are part of every student's grade, and they have common rubrics across the entire network. So for any project that kids work on, 60% of it is academic content, and 40% of it is comprised of these school-wide learning outcomes. So for example, maybe for this project, 60% is math and science, and then maybe you've got a written communication component, or an oral communication component, or a collaboration component, or a critical thinking component, or a tech proficiency component, and those are weighted in different ways. But regardless of whether, say your oral communication component is 5% or 15% for this particular project, it always uses the same rubric. Which means that over the course of 4 years, where students are giving this presentations over and over and over again to the community about what they learned in their projects, being held to a common rubric across grade levels, subject areas, teachers, etc., they get really, really good at giving presentations because everybody's in agreement about what a good presentation looks like. And they do the same thing for writing and collaboration and creative work and so on. And that's folded right into their academic grades as part of the process. New Tech's a pretty neat place. This is the only private school on my list of schools I'm showing you. I give that the caveat just to notice that, you'll notice about the Muse School is that it's a perfect marriage of school philosophy with setting. They have the ability to buy an old summer camp in Los Angeles, and they're situated there, which is kind of cool. But when I went to visit Muse School, my boss and I kept walking around going, there isn't anything going on here that any other school couldn't do. The Muse School is dedicated to Common Core standards. They focus primarily on early childhood through 4th grade. They have an incredibly strong emphasis on the environment, and then very high levels of student agency and control. Almost everything they do is through passionate inquiry-based projects. You walk onto campus and you see signs like this. My boss actually had gifts for them in a plastic bag. I was like, get rid of the bag. So everywhere you go, you see planters, window boxes, those garden boxes on the right. There's about 100 of those all across the campus. It's kind of cool where kids are growing stuff. They've got big gardens like this. They've got herb gardens indoors. They've got the worm farm. They compost. They do the whole bit, right? The sustainability piece is pretty big. They've got goats and chickens. They've got this awesome maker space, which is not robots like we might think about, and sphero balls and 3D printers, but actual junkyard where kids pull stuff together with hammers and drills and nails and wrenches and screws, and they make stuff, right? Like here's some kids are making some kind of cart with wheels. Who knows what they're doing? My 3rd grade tour guide was like, yeah, I know how to operate a bandsaw, right? With supervision, of course, right? You just turn them loose. So there's kind of a cool place. 5 pillars of Muse, a very strong emphasis on academics. Again, they're operating under the Common Core standards, focused on sustainability, passion-based learning everywhere. And a couple components which I thought were kind of cool. They focus very heavily on student self-efficacy, and then also a process communication model that teaches kids to be effective communicators. One of the most interesting things about Muse to me, in addition to the environmental stuff everywhere, was that the classrooms start off blank at the beginning of the year. There isn't anything on the walls, anywhere. The kids make every single thing that goes up on the walls, ceilings, etc. There's no teacher-created stuff. There's no teacher-bought stuff. The kids do it all. So this is the job chart made out of cardboard, right? Where the kids figure out what the jobs are, and they got little popsicle sticks so they can throw themselves in there, and the kids made that. This is part of their communication model where kids can walk in every day and they can move their clothespin and say, for the next few hours, when I do my work, I'd like to work alone or in a small group or a large group or in a pair. And the kids get to pick their work model, which is kind of cool. That's pretty respectful of kids, right? Over here on the right, this idea that they're open, they're resourceful, and they're persistent. They're trying to get kids to own their learning. So be open to new experiences, be resourceful about how to find ways to solve problems and get the resources you need, and be persistent. Don't give up, sort of that grit narrative that we've been going on. You'll see that they also, each classroom decides what their theme is. So they were the sloths. So when you walk in, the entire room was a bunch of construction paper jungle with vines and sloths and stuff that the kids all made. It's kind of cool. Again, part of that communication model. It's very funny to watch 2nd graders say things like, when you blank, I feel blank because blank. And I would prefer blank. Right? Like that kind of communication string at age 7 is pretty cool. But they're, starting to model at early ages what effective compassionate communication looks like. They really fold in and blend in these components in different ways. So, they have a sustainability focus. How do we align that with our academics? So let's learn how to do graphing, for example, by measuring the amount of composting that we're doing each week. And so when you go into the dining hall, you can see, the graphing stuff there. Down in, this is like the 4-year-old room, and there's some passion-based learning. So even at 4, kids can have some ownership over what they do. Every kid is on an individualized learning plan. So, for example, my 4th grade tour guide, her passion project was to try and feed the school for 2 weeks. She was growing 250 heads of lettuce all by herself. Just kind of neat. You'll see these blueprints here for these 4-year-olds, right? Elle is interested in ballerinas right now. Leo's interested in dinosaurs. Myers is interested in cats. Cruz is interested in ice cream. What they do is that the teacher says, for the next week, it's Meyer's turn, and so I'm going to work with Meyer to design next week's learning for our class, and the theme is going to be cats. And when we do literacy work, it's through the lens of cats. And when we do numeracy work, it's through the lens of cats. When we do speaking and listening skills, it's through the lens of cats. And everything is through Meyer's lens, and Meyer gets to help plan that week, and that's pretty cool. And the previous week was baking, and the next week is dinosaurs, and who knows where it's going to go, but it's a way of folding in those kids' interest into that essential work in ways that work. It's kind of cool. And one of the models that they have is that interests that they have today may develop into passions tomorrow, which is kind of fun. All right, another whole school model. This is my favorite school I've ever been to, the New Village Girls Academy in California. New Village is the only public all-girls school in the state of California. 110 girls. They're all coming from conditions of poverty. Half of them are pregnant or parenting. 30% live in a foster home or an institution. Many of them are English language learners. Drug abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, incarceration, self-harm, anything that you can think of as a disadvantaging condition, these girls have it. They come from pretty rough lives. They have very low support systems. New Village reclaims these girls and sends most of them on to college. What do? They do 4 things. It's not a very fancy facility, right? Basically a dusty courtyard with a few tables for dining. They have a little garden growing on. But the 4 things they do. 1, they have a very strong advisory system. Girls spend all morning, every day, in groups of 15 to 25 with their advisor, where the advisor checks in with them. How's your brother doing? I heard he's getting out of jail soon. Have you heard from your mom lately? How'd your meeting with your social worker go last week? How's your baby? You know, did you take her to the pediatrician? You get the idea, right? Checking in on all that kind of stuff. Make those connections as need be with the other support systems within the school community. Second thing is very complex interdisciplinary passion projects. I'll show you in just a minute the kind of work that these girls are doing. Much more complex than most schools are asking, even their most advanced kids. Community-based internships, this is not free labor. They send girls out twice a week, every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, out to the community to do an internship somewhere. They're not supposed to be free labor. They're supposed to learn how to run the place, which is kind of cool. And then finally, I thought this was sort of fascinating, a strong emphasis on mindfulness. They've taught kids mindfulness techniques, a little bit of meditation, so that they can learn how to stay centered emotionally and cognitively, and maybe spiritually, within the chaos that's all around them, which I thought was a pretty essential component. So here's girls that basically society has written off, right? And they're studying essential questions like these, right? Big, huge, guiding questions that they investigate for weeks at a time. They come up with what they want to study, and then off they go. They have detailed planning charts. So here's one girl's investigation around what would the world be like without oil? Could the world even run out of gas? Is the intersection of politics and gas companies good or bad? Is gas worth killing for? How has immigration shaped our nation? How do immigrants cross the border? How do they affect our economy and our culture? Why can't states just handle the immigrants as they come in? Should animal testing happen? What constitutes animal cruelty? How can cosmetic companies ensure safety without using animal testing? Should animals have the right to painkillers? Should science classes be able to dissect animals? What rights should people have? Are there limits to freedom of speech? What gives the government the right to hide information from the nation? And so on. Deep, abiding questions and investigations. Complex, critical thinking work that most students in most secondary schools don't ever get to do because they're too busy recalling and regurgitating. I made a girl cry because she was telling me about her mom who was in prison, and her investigation had to do with whether or not Latino and the Latina defendants got a raw deal from the public defender system because she thought her mom had, which is why she was in jail now. And she was comparing incarceration and public defender treatments of Latinas versus other demographic groups, primarily white, to see what the contrast was there in terms of statistics and other markers. And that was a very personally driven project, right? So, good stuff here. They're living in that kind of thought space every single day. Internships range wisely, might be everything from the local bicycle shop to the ACOU or the California Science Center. This is Los Angeles after all. It might be at the Harley-Davidson or the hospice, law firm, LAPD. It might be the local knitting store or an income tax shop, or it might be something larger like legal services or the U.S. Senator's office. Here I am having a conversation with one of the girls. She had done an internship last semester at a kennel because she liked animals, and she really liked the running the business aspects, but then very quickly realized that most of that job was kind of cleaning cages, and that wasn't of interest. So the next semester, she was doing her internship at a dog trainer, and she was fascinated about the psychology of training dogs, and she and I are having a conversation right now about, is there any difference between training dogs and training orcas at SeaWorld? She had just submitted her SAT scores that morning to 5 universities with zoology programs. The path between a dog kennel internship and a zoology major at a university 5 states away is shorter than we might think. That's the New Village Girls Academy. They reclaim girls and send them on. So, a couple of whole school models, New Village, Muse, so on, New Tech. Turn to your neighbor one more time and talk about, could you do that? Could you create a school within a school, maybe, where you carved out space for 30 or 40 students to do an Iowa Big, New Tech, Muse, New Village kind of thing? Or is that too scary and intimidating? Talk with your neighbor. Go.
Okay. Well, the Three Girls Academy, I really like the idea of internships, but in a rural community like this, like where would all the kids go? They would have to find them a dog trainer or seems like anytime these kids go to school, they end up doing stuff like cleaning out cages or copies for a lawyer or stuff like that. It's not actually
You have to get that one, you have to get the right people to be the sponsors. The New Tech, as far as like math and science, yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, that'd be absolutely fantastic.
All right. Talk about one last school, the one that's on the far end of the continuum, the one that usually freaks most people out, and then we'll wrap this up. So I had a chance to go to New Zealand, and I got to visit the Discovery School, which is grades 4 through 8. We also have a sister school, Unlimited, which is 9 through 12. I didn't get a chance to get over there, but I did get a chance to spend some time in Discovery. Here's how Discovery works. As young as 4th grade, kids pick what they want to learn all year in 6-week blocks. So teachers don't do any kind of direct instruction, really. Basically, they're just coaches and facilitators, where they say to kids, what do you want to learn about for the next 6 weeks? And kids will identify things that they want to do. And then the teacher helps coach and guide and fold in academic experiences along the way so that kids get whatever they think they might need to make that an academically enriching experience. So when I was there, one kid was working on raising monies so that his entire pod, they called them pods, entire pod could take surfing lessons, right? And then the goal was at the end of the term, at the end of the 6 weeks or 12 weeks or whatever, is that they were going to have a surfing tournament judged by the top surfer in New Zealand. I met 2 girls who were writing their own play together, right? They were like 6th grade, 7th grade, and they were writing their own play, and of course they were going to stage it, which means not only did they have to write it, but they also had to recruit actors and actresses. They had to figure out how they were going to find a facility to put it, a playhouse to put it on. They had to work with set design. They had to do marketing, recruiting, and sell tickets and publicity and all that. Think about all this stuff, all the academic stuff that gets folded into writing and putting on a play in terms of writing and money and math and speaking and listening skills and communication with adults and navigating the adult environment and so on. Lots of rich stuff happening there. I got to sit in on a one-on-one consultation meeting between a coach and a student. She was working on a brain cancer advocacy campaign because her friend's mom died of brain cancer, and She thought that we didn't know enough about that, so she was working on a public advocacy campaign, and the coach / teacher was saying things like, so what are you going to do that's more than a PowerPoint, right? And then this student was saying, well, I've learned about all that I can from the internet and books and whatever. I need to go out to the hospital and talk with doctors and nurses who live in this area. And the teacher's like, okay, we'll see you in a few days. The kid was just going to disappear, right? And then come back when she had the requisite knowledge. And so this idea of using the community as a learning space was kind of cool. And one of the fun things about Discovery is that you can't ever really find the teacher because they're just in the mix with the kids, right? They're on the floor, they're behind a table, they're under the table. Again, trying to find the teacher in a lot of these spaces is pretty tough. Basically, the kids just own everything. Every time the group's not working well, the teachers reflected back, how do you think you should handle that? Every time there's something that needs to be done on a project. I had one kid who was working on digital animation, and he had done digital animation every 6 weeks over and over and over again. And they started to worry because they were trying to fold it in different ways. Let's fold in a history component to that. Let's do digital animation with science. Let's do digital animation with math. Right? They're trying to round this kid out. And he just kept saying, I want to do digital animation. And finally started to realize, oh my goodness, he's getting really good at digital animation. In fact, as he's getting ready to leave us at the end of 8th grade and head to Unlimited, he has the digital animation skills that you might expect from a second-year college student. Maybe we should just leave this kid alone and let him gain the skills he needs to be awesome out in the marketplace. And so they kind of reconciled in that so that if he changes his mind later, he'll still have that experience of going deep about something he's passionate about. And we folded in and tried to round him out in other ways, and that was kind of cool. Discovery is not for everybody, right? So this idea that students drive their own learning freaks a lot of people out, but I can tell you that it works. They do just fine on the national assessment. In fact, they do better than most. It's kind of cool because they make sure that kids fold in what they need. So kids were passing around fiction for same-age peers that they'd written, and they realized it was really boring. So the teacher did a dropout right there on the spot, and they spent some time on rich descriptive adjectives and adverbs. And the kids ate it up because they wanted the writing to be better. But here in America, we would have just said, okay, class, tomorrow we're doing adjectives and adverbs. And everybody went, but there they ate it up because it's being driven by their work and a felt need that they had. And that's the difference between student agency and teacher directedness. So that's Discovery in a nutshell. Very cool place, but again, far over on the continuum compared to the way most schools work. All right, let's wrap this up. When I talk to schools, we sort of see 3 big shifts that we have to make simultaneously. The shift from lower level learning to deeper learning. How do we move up Bloom's taxonomy more often? How do we give kids greater agency and ownership over their own space? And then how do we use the tools to make it happen? You'll notice that this keynote has not talked very much about technology, even though this is a technology conference. Why is that? Because in these schools, the emphasis is on the learning and on the teaching. The technology is, as Chris Lehman says, ubiquitous, necessary, but invisible. In other words, you can't do this work without the technology, but it's folded in very natural, authentic, real-world ways. It's not a special event. Technology is not something we march down the hall to the lab to do. Technology is not some special occasion where we roll the cart in and get it out. Technology is ever present in all the work that they do, just like in the real world. And that's where the tech is in these schools. Wrap it up. What kind of schools do we want? A school that's designed for inquiry is very different than a school designed for compliance. A school that's designed for critical thinking and problem solving and creativity is very different from one that's focused on worksheets, textbooks, and lectures. A school like these is very different from a school based on stand and deliver, call and response. Somehow, over the past 100 years ago or so, we've forgotten what we knew back in the days when learning for most youth meant learning to run the farm, or maybe an apprenticeship with a local cooper or blacksmith or tanner. Somehow we've elevated the academic work over the purpose behind the work. There's no reason to expect that factory model schools that were designed for an analog manufacturing economy would be the right fit for a hyper-connected, hyper-competitive digital global knowledge economy and information society, but of course that's what we have. What kind of schools do we want? What are we willing to do to create them? We've forgotten that the best learning experiences are hands-on and applied, immersed in the real world. We've forgotten that true deep learning is rarely linear, almost never neatly organized by chapters and sections. We've forgotten that authentic, powerful learning rarely takes the form of a worksheet, or an end-of-chapter review problem, or a multiple-choice quiz. We have the ability to reclaim this if we choose. I think that's a goal worth working toward. That's what these schools are doing in a variety of different ways, big and small. We've got to stop pretending that students actually care about and we're remembering all the minutiae that we shove at them. Higher level thinkers don't just magically emerge from low level thinking spaces. If we want critical thinkers, if we want problem solvers, we have to design for it. Right now, our schools are perfectly designed to churn out low level thinkers. What kind of schools do we want? What are we willing to do to create them? We have to get past the read this, answer these pedagogical model. We have to fall out of love with our own voices and enable those of our students instead. And if we can do that, like these schools are trying to do, if we can get out of our comfort zones and head towards where the magic actually happens, we can give kids wings and they can fly to heights never imaginable. Schools around the country, schools around the world are showing us that we can make school different. The technology tools are a way to make that happen, but we must rethink learning and teaching, and we must be willing to give up some control. Thanks for spending the morning with me. Have a great day.